It is my pleasure to present tonight's speaker, Charlie Catlett, who will tell us about coins of the World War II Lodz Ghetto. Um, Take it away, Charlie.
Okay, very good. Couple quick things before I start my talk. Very first, this city in Poland, I have mispronounced my entire life and always called it Lodz. I learned from a friend who speaks Polish. This L, what looks like an L, is actually pronounced like a W. The O with the little thing above it is got to sound like an U. So the town is pronounced more like Łódź. So my apologies for not speaking Polish. I'll probably mess up some other Polish names during this talk. But this is a talk about the World War II token coinage of the Łódź Litzmannstadt Ghetto. Interesting little factoid I didn't know where else to put. The Italian word ghetto means foundry. And in the 16th century, the Jewish quarters in Venice were located near a very famous iron foundry. And from then on, marginalized societies around cities were often called ghettos, not only Jewish people, other populations as well. The third thing, and this is something I think a lot of you will appreciate, the basis of this talk came from a auction lot about a year or two ago where there was one token that I wanted. It was a anti-Semitic token from the late 1600s, and I just wanted to have that piece. There are a bunch of other coins and tokens in it, and the description included a bunch of, World War II coins from the Łódź ghetto. I knew nothing about them, but I thought, okay, it would be kind of fun as a bonus. Well, I bid maybe more than I should have on the lot. I did get it, and I found out there were all these coins from this ghetto, and it turns out this was the only prisoner of or concentration camp or ghetto in all of World War II that actually made coins. So I thought, well, there's a story to be told, and this is the story. And I'm going to start with a little bit of a history. I'm a little bit geographically limited, so I had to find a map. This is a relatively modern European map. Here's Poland, and here's the town of Łódź. The first mention of the town goes back to 1332, and it was actually granted city rights in 1423 by King Władysław. Poland, unfortunately, has been divided and subdivided and partitioned many, many times over the years. And in the late 1700s, it was partitioned a couple times. During the second partition of Poland in 1793, it was given to Prussia. Then in 1815, the Congress of Vienna Treaty made it a part of the Congress Kingdom of Poland, which was essentially a client state of Russia. A year after that, the Tsar gave permission for Germans. It was a decree for German immigrants to clear land and build factories and houses in the town. And from about 1824 on, many weavers from the surrounding regions settled in Łódź, and it developed into Poland's largest industrial city, mainly based on textiles. Oh, great. Fast forward to World War I. The Battle of Łódź in November, December 1914, Poland lost to Germany. And this guy, Karl Litzmann, 1918, Germany lost World War I, and Łódź is returned to Poland. History repeats itself, and in September of 1939, Poland is defeated by Germany. And 6 months later, the town of Łódź is renamed after this guy, Karl Litzmann. And there are several parts of the story I'm talking about today that I found in the literature that didn't quite make sense or seem contradictory. Several writings said that Litzmann was a commander who died in World War I as a hero. And I really wanted to find out, who was this guy? Carl Ludwig Wilhelm Harman Litzmann was born in 1850. That's 10, 15 years before our Civil War. Began his military career early. He saw action in the Franco-Prussian War, and he headed Prussia's Imperial War Academy at age 52 for a few years and retired. In World War I, he was reactivated as a commander, and it was his troops that were key to winning the Battle of Łódź in November of 1914. He was also nicknamed the Lion of, not sure how to pronounce that, which was a nearby town that he captured. He was so good he was promoted to general in 1914, and then he retired at the age of 68 in 1918. 11 years later, he joins the Nazi Party in 1929, and 3 years after that, he's elected to the Reichstag, where as an 82-year-old, he became president by seniority. And by virtue of all of these things, they renamed the town of Łódź after Germany took over in World War II. They called it Litzmannstadt. So that was in September when the Germans defeated Poland. In October 1939, the Nazis appointed a man named Mordecai Rumkowski to be the chief elder of the Jews, essentially the Jewish leader in the ghetto, and I'll get back to that in a little bit. In February of 1940, all of the Jewish inhabitants of the city and the surrounding area were displaced to a northern section of the city, and they were separated from the remaining population. They were completely isolated. This is about a third of the entire population of the area, and this is what actually formed the Łódź-Litzmannstadt ghetto, which was the second largest one in World War II, second only to the Warsaw Ghetto. By May 1940, there was a barbed wire fence completely surrounding the ghetto. It was hermetically sealed. Nobody got in, nobody got out. No information got in, no information got out. So the people really, the Jewish residents were essentially trapped there. There were 160,000 Jews inside the ghetto. There are over 30,000 apartments in the ghetto in 4 square kilometers, and actually only about 2/3 of that was buildable. The rest of it was kind of swampland. There were only 725 apartments with running water, and most didn't have sewage. So if you do the math, and I hope I got this right, there were 40,000 people per square kilometer. Actually, it's closer to 60,000 if you look at the part that was built up. And Manhattan now only has 27,000 per square kilometer. So it was pretty crowded in there. And much of it was industrial. So the housing was very tight. Go forward to 1941 and 42, there were an initial 40,000 Jews from Germany, Austria, Luxembourg sent to Łódź, as well as 5,000 Roma. They needed room for all these people, and so from January through September 1942, 40,000 of the Jews and the Roma were transferred to a killing center in Chełmno, Poland, and they were killed in mobile gas vans. These are basically like moving trucks where they packed the people in, they dropped a canister of Zyklon gas inside until they died, and then they emptied it out and kept doing it. This particularly included the sick, the elderly, and kids under 10 because they weren't old enough to work or were any good inside the ghetto. In August of 1944, the ghetto was the last remaining one in Poland. Interestingly, Heinrich Himmler had actually suggested closing the ghetto 2 years earlier and just killing the Jews. Unfortunately, it was so valuable as an industrial center that he was overruled. But in August of 44, it was liquidated because the Soviet army was advancing. So of the 80,000 surviving residents at that time, 7,200 were sent to Chełmno, and the rest were murdered in Auschwitz-Birkenau. There were only 870 Jews who remained. Some of them were used for what was called clearing work, where they were basically removing archives and any other evidence of the things that went on. Some managed to go in hiding, and eventually they were freed in January of 1945 when Lodz was occupied by the Soviet army, and it reverted back to its Polish name. Probably 10 to 20,000 of the residents of that city actually probably survived World War II after being transferred to other work camps. But while the camp was in existence, it was a very important industrial center that served the German army very well. These are all pictures from the camp. The railroad that traveled right through the middle of the city was it actually divided the ghetto in half, and the residents had to clamber over this wooden deck, and there was barbed wire, and there are armed guards back there to keep anybody from going out. So very clean, nice railroad tracks leading outside, and just packed people going to and fro to work. This is a weaving factory that you can see. There's a shoe factory. You can see lots of kids working. They have a picture of the nurses and doctors. There were actually 5 hospitals in the ghetto at the time that it was started. And who was the person in charge of the ghetto was the one I mentioned before, Mordecai Chaim Rumkowski, who was born initially in Russian Empire, and he became a Polish citizen after the Second Polish Republic formed in 1918. Initially was an insurance agent. Later he headed a Jewish orphanage. There's one eyewitness report that quoted him as having an unhealthy interest in children, which is kind of interesting. He was married at one time, but he never had children of his own. In October of 1939, shortly after the Germans occupied Poland, he was appointed by the Nazis to be the Judenältester, the chief elder of the Jews. And as such, he was the head of a Jewish administration for the whole ghetto. He had 7,300 workers in the administration. There were banks, there were 5 hospitals, there were schools, there were soup kitchens, there was all the industrial machinery that he basically was in charge of. And he was notorious for collaborating with the Nazis and basically bending over backwards to do their bidding. So if he had any political enemies, they were put on a list to be transported out of the ghetto, which means they were murdered in Chelmno or in Auschwitz. When the 40,000 people were being sent out to make room, he was the one to send the Germans to various locations, and there are certain residences or sections of town that were more protected. He was notorious for one particular speech where he implored the parents of the ghetto, saying, "Mothers and fathers, give me your children." Basically telling all the parents to give up all kids under age 10 because they couldn't work, so they were basically a burden on the Germans. All the hospitals were raided of the patients. They took every patient out of the hospitals and took them off to death camps. And Rumkowski was essentially the Jewish leader bidding for the German authorities. It didn't save him. He ended up dying in Auschwitz when the Lodz ghetto was liquidated. Getting to Camp Money, which is what was interesting and what this talk is about, food was a very limited commodity, and people were forced to work very long and hard. And there was no way to smuggle extra food into the ghetto. Rumkowski felt that hard work was what was going to keep them alive, so it made them work 12-hour days. And with a low pay of about 40 marks a month, it didn't help much. And the other way of helping to function as money was scrip. So there were food rations, there were scripts, there were probably hundreds or even thousands of ration cards good for items like potatoes or flour or coal for burning, only good for a certain amount and only good for certain days. And the people had to wait for supplies, and often things didn't arrive. So there's a lot of hunger in the camps, and they had to scrap for whatever they could get. There was a functioning post office. There were postal stamps and small chits for change. The Germans wanted to develop a camp currency, so Rumkowski was put in charge of producing this currency. And that was going to be used for purchasing food rations and other necessities, because the Germans withdrew the Reichsmark in July of 1940 as legal tender. So the ghetto notes that Rumkowski was in charge of producing were printed with a date of May 15th, but they were issued in July when Germany withdrew actual German money. And there was a couple reasons for this. Um, the currency was issued in 50 Pfennig, 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, and 50 mark denominations, and they were issued as Quittungen because the Jews were only allowed to hold receipts for money. Quittungen means receipts, so they couldn't actually possess Reichsmark or German money. Therefore, the camp currency was only good inside the camp. So any Jew who escaped, they didn't have anything to pay for money outside the camp. Also, the Nazi used these receipts to help pay for any kind of confiscated property, objects that were mailed to the residents of the city. Were often confiscated by the Germans and at a very low value. The recipient was given these receipts instead. The sun rising behind a man who is shaking off his chain or his chains, and you can imagine why that was rejected. A second design by Ignaz Gutmann was accepted. Lithography printing by the S. Mantius printing office on the Aryan side of town was used, and some of these denominations actually had watermarks. Um, there was one warning on the back, and I actually have a copy of it here as well, about counterfeiting. And it said counterfeiting of the receipt, the Quittungen, or circulation of a counterfeit receipt are subject to severe punishment. Interestingly, a man named Roxburger did counterfeit about 5,000 of the 2 mark notes. He made a mistake of releasing them a bit before the official ghetto currency 2 mark notes were printed, and he forgot to add a little security mark. So these are the official 2 mark notes, and it says Quittungen, or a receipt for 2 marks. This is der Ältester der Juden, the elder of the Jews in Litzmannstadt, and this is Rumkowski's signature. Litzmannstadt, it's dated the 15th of May, although it was actually released in July. On the back, there's a menorah, and also it says Quittungen, a receipt for 2 marks, and here is the little warning. But if you look really closely between the M and the A, there's a little tiny dot here, and that's a security mark. So the man who did the counterfeiting forgot to include that. Well, they captured him, they tried him, they convicted him. There are a couple of reports of where he went, but he probably went to a different concentration camp because he was so good at his counterfeiting, and he participated in Operation Bernard, where the Germans counterfeited British banknotes. This is a 10 mark note, same thing, receipt for 10 marks. Here's a different printing for the warnings they have. And inside the H here is the little security mark for the 10 mark bill. So this is in 1940 when the currency was produced. They still had some German coins, and I suspect there were probably some Polish coins as well, but by March of 1942, all coins of the German Reich were confiscated. Stamps at the time cost 10 Pfennig, but the smallest currency note produced in the ghetto were 50 Pfennig. So what did they do? They tried making some postal chits of 40 cents, and you could tear off a 10 Pfennig or 10-cent bit. Didn't work really well. So Rumkowski proposed minting coins, and no other POW concentration camp ghetto had them. Hans Bibo, which is the man in the picture right here, he was the head of the German ghetto administration, and he was an avid coin and stamp collector. And that's probably why this is the only place with POWs in a ghetto or concentration camp that actually produced coins. This is a picture of Rumkowski chatting with Hans Bibo. I was going to say, besides being a stamp collector, he was the one who directed Rumkowski for all the goings on. So basically, Rumkowski did everything that Bibo requested. And when the Russians took over the camp in 1945, Bibo went into hiding. They did find him, they did try and convict him, and he was hung. So he paid his price for all the atrocities that he committed. But as far as the coins being produced, there was a competition that was won by a man named Picus Swark, and an initial mintage of 100,000 coins were done on June 14th in 1942. All the coins were minted in the metalworking department. They know exactly where it was, 73 Hansittenstrasse. But they also were making buckets and pullers and cutting tools and screwdrivers. They were making 40 million steel cores for infantry ammunition every month, along with, now they had to start making coins as well. You may wonder what this picture has to do with anything. Another myth that was reported in another number of the articles about these coins is that the source of metal for the coins was from downed aircraft from World War II. Well, this is a piece of a P-52 that crashed on Mount Tam up in Marin County. And you can only imagine what the rest of the metal from that plane looked like. And it's hard to imagine getting enough scraps to put together something to produce coins. And the fact is, the material for the coins was a magnesium alloy called Electron AM503, which is 97% magnesium, 2 to 3% manganese, and some trace elements. This was provided by the Third Reich in sheets when available, and later on they also used aluminum too. Most of the magnesium coins actually didn't survive the war because what does magnesium do? It burns. And what are the people in the ghetto? They were cold. They needed something to help start fire, and so the coins a lot of times were actually used to help start the fire, used for heating, because eventually the money became relatively useless. But the planchets for the coins were punched from a 2-meter long strip. They were 6 millimeters wider than the coin, using a 25-ton cam press. And the coins were minted with the same cam press, inserted manually one by one and minted in a collar. And they tried a number of designs to try to minimize breakage of dies and other problems, but they just had inferior materials. So a lot of the coins you'll see have die breaks and such on them. The punching and minting was also done at room temperature. Metal is more prone to cracking at that temperature, and you'd think they would be heated to some degree, but metal analysis has been done to show that's what happened. There was a master hub, which produced master dies, and they made working hubs and working dies for each of the varieties that were made. The engraving was mostly done by hand, though they think there was an engraving machine that kind of did some pre-engraving. Blank dies were turned from a water-quenched steel, but it was fairly inferior, so unfortunately lots of dies ended up breaking. And we actually have the name of a number of the minting team members, which is a bit surprising because most of the people in the ghetto were nameless. As far as engraving, Mordecai Brown actually survived the war, moved to Tel Aviv, and he's the one who gives a lot of information about the ghetto and the various workers. The head of the metal workshop actually carried one of the coins that was minted in the ghetto with him to his death in Auschwitz. So now it's time to get into the coins themselves. These are this is the 10 pfennig coin. This is made of magnesium, which is known to oxidize pretty well. So I'm pretty happy that this is as good a condition as it is, because a lot of magnesium and zinc coins really show a lot of wear from World War II. 100,000 of these were made. There's one problem. The design was rejected by Hans Bibo, and these are the reasons. This is a German, I believe it's made out of zinc, 10 pfennig coin. The size is too similar to the German coin. The number 10 is too similar. You can't use German oak leaves with the Jewish star. And the corner ears, which actually I think is either barley or wheat, were felt to be undesirable. So the 100,000 coins that were minted were destroyed. It's really hard to um, take those coins, process them, and make new planchets. It's too difficult to metal. They didn't have the equipment to do that at the Ghetto, so there aren't a whole lot of those that survive. This is actually the letter from Hans Bibo rejecting the coins. A second design featured a menorah, but that was rejected. Not sure why, because the menorah was on the currency. But a third design, which is called Type 2 by Pekka Schwark, was accepted, and this is what it looks like. So here's the Type 1 that was not accepted. This says der Älteste der Juden, the elder of the Jews, and the back Litzmannstadt Ghetto with the date. This says Quittungen über, which is like another receipt for 10 Pfennig. And this says der Älteste der Juden in Litzmannstadt. So, and the date is on the inside. This is magnesium, a little hard to see, so this may make it a little easier. These are 10 Pfennig, supposedly trial stakes, copper, nickel, and silver. Or maybe not. So this is the actual circulating coin. There's a little square that's supposed to be in here that isn't on these trial strikes. So there are a number of counterfeits or after the war issues, and it's not really sure if these were actually minted during the war in the ghetto itself, or these were made afterwards. And I know there are probably a couple of these that have been certified by PCGS, but they may have been fooled. So there are three other denominations. The 5 mark coin was made in magnesium. This is the best example that I've got. The exact same design in aluminum. The 10 mark coin is made in magnesium and also aluminum. There were numerous counterfeits or souvenirs made after the war, and this is actually one example I got with my collection. Actually is nice enough to say faux du souvenir, that at least we know it's a fake. These are the aluminum varieties that were made. So there was what's called a flat die, which is fairly shallow strike, and there's this is the normal die, which has a much deeper strike. These come in a thin planchet and a thick planchet variety, which I have both of. The flat die, I have 2 examples. They both weigh 3.4 grams. So I think the aluminum just came in different thickness sheets, and the residents of the ghetto just made planches with what they had. It's interesting, over the U, there are 2 dots. It's called an umlaut, that they forgot to put in the master hub or the master dies. So each of the working dies, they had to hand stamp the little dots there. And they've done die studies where they've been able to kind of follow the production of those based on the differences in those. Finally, we come to a 20 mark, which was only made in aluminum. It was had a mintage of 600 because they started making it 3 weeks before the ghetto was closed. If you look real closely, there's a tiny little dot there. That's an intentional dot. It's actually a little triangle, and it's a security mark to help prevent counterfeiting. And after the war, there were numerous counterfeiting samples made, but the real ones all have this little triangle. I've got a couple of them, and they both have the exact same shape to the triangle, which is interesting. Finally, I have a 5 Pfennig, what was called a trial piece, made of nickel. It's not in any of the references that I have, so again, I don't know if this is kind of an after the war fantasy piece, or if this was truly a trial, a 5 Pfennig piece, but it's part of the collection that I've got. So there were some lead trial stakes that are known to exist. We're not really sure if they also are authentic or if they were made after the war. The authentic dies were kept in the state mint, which I think was in Warsaw, and so they may have just made these after the war or not. We're not sure about that. These probably are real pattern strikes in lead of this is a 20, this is a 10 mark pattern piece. So those are the coins of the Litzmannstadt ghetto. It was the only ghetto or concentration camp to produce money, but there are also lots of prisoner of war camps or displaced person camps actually all over the world. We actually had camps here in the United States for Japanese people, but I have three camps in particular that did produce coins that I may have shown some of these before, but I wanted to just include these as a little extra. Ireland had an internment camp in Curragh. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And, Ireland was neutral in World War II. They were closed to all belligerent ships and aircraft. They didn't want anything to do with it, but of course, planes crash, ships get wrecked. There are other mishaps, and so Allied and Axis internees both ended up in Ireland. So there was a camp in Ireland that had British internees at Camp B, German internees stayed at Camp G. They actually kept some Irish Republican Army internees there in, I don't know if it was Camp I forget what that was. And it's interesting that both British and German officers were allowed to attend the Irish Derby outside of this camp at the race course. And they were given a paper parole, good for part of a day, where they were actually allowed to leave the camp, go to the races, and then come back. And both the German and the English governments discouraged escaping while they were out on these paroles because that was an abuse of privilege. All other times, they were encouraged to escape. So all of the coins for the internment camp in Ireland are uniface. There are these four denominations that happen to have a penny in brass. The Isle of Man is where 85% of the British enemy civilian alien internees went. So England has all these Germans and Italians and people they didn't want around, so they shipped them off, and 85% went to the Isle of Man. Mostly they were German Jews who had fled Nazi Germany, and many had actually escaped from concentration camps. There's an area of the city of Anchan that had 60 homes, which was a former boarding school, and it was chosen for the camp. The homeowners were given 1 week to vacate, and then they brought in all these internees. It was actually a really nice camp. They had a soccer field, tennis courts, lots of activities, but the residents just didn't like it there. They wanted to be released. They wanted to help the British war effort. They protested, they wrote letters, they wrote articles in a newspaper, and with a lot of effort, by July 1941, the camp was closed. Many of the internees from the camp actually did help the English or British war effort. The camp was reopened September 1941 for Italian enemy aliens. I have no idea what happened to them during or after the war. But of all the Isle of Man camps, Anchan was the only one to issue coins in a halfpence, penny, and sixpence, and they're all made of brass. So the sizes and weights of these are correct. This is a penny. This is a halfpenny. The penny is actually bigger, smaller and lighter than the halfpenny. This is just some oxidization there. I'm not sure why. Stephen, you may have an answer. Somebody else may have an answer, but for some reason, the halfpence is bigger than the penny on that. Finally, Australia had internment camps. There were several of them. And there's an interesting story. In July of 1940, the Andorra Star was a repurposed cruise ship carrying Germans and Italians and some POWs to Canada. It was sunk by the Germans. A week later, the Dumera sailed with mostly Jewish refugees from Germany and Austria. They were told they were going to be going to Canada, but instead they went to Australia. The ship was designed for 1,600 people. It carried 2,542 plus the crew. There were only 24 latrines on one deck of 1,600 people, and you were given 2 sheets of toilet paper per person per day. The people were sick, they were cramped, they were crowded, they were forced to go on top of the deck every single day for exercise, and when they did that, the English sailors went downstairs and rummaged through all the belongings. They tossed a bunch of stuff overboard. They tossed books and suitcases, you name it. Ironically, there was a German U-boat that was tailing the ship, and the German U-boat spotted all this literature in German and thought they were all German POWs and decided not to bomb the Dumera. So the Dumera ended up in Australia, and the main camp in Australia was called was Camp 7 or Camp Hay. And there were tokens issued by the Australian government for the camps, manufactured in their city of Victoria. The R&D and Sons produced the penny, 2 shilling, and 5 shilling tokens. The 3p and 1 shilling tokens were produced by the KG Lucan Company. The 1 penny was brass, all the others were bronze. And I think I showed this once before, and that's why there was a different color to that. So this is brass, all the other designs were bronze. So these are the only 2 coins I have from the Australian internment camps. And I think they were good for all the camps, although Camp 7 was their biggest camp. I have a bibliography at the end, but I wanted to go over the books really quick. The first really thorough book on POW money was by Lance Campbell. It's black and white. It's very straightforward and helpful when you're looking up coins, but not a lot of information. Silent Witnesses was done by Stephen Ray Feller. This is a father and daughter team. It's in color and it has a tremendous amount of history of all the different camps, civilian camps, and is a very valuable tool just for information. I had this for years before I actually got this collection, and it's well worth it even if you don't want to collect the script or the money or such. This is a book that I found that actually has the die study and specifics on the actual minting. This is the book that interviewed Mordecai Brown from Tel Aviv that got a lot of the information about the actual minting process. And there's actually the Chronicle, the Rouge Ghetto, which was over 1,000 pages of chronicle that was kind of kept from the Nazis, but it has a daily review of the happenings in the camp, that some of the information about the goings on came from. It's not a very easy read. It lists the births, the deaths, the suicides, a lot of unpleasant things, but it's kind of fascinating just to see how people survived the life in the ghetto. Here's the bibliography. You notice the second one is by me. I actually wrote an article in the Shekel. It's the journal of the American Israel Numismatic Association, which was just printed a couple weeks ago. So it's got all these coins with the weights and the information as a reference for future looking up if you want to. And I leave this not as a statement, but as a somewhat a rhetorical question, because this is the fun part about our hobby, is what I really like about the Pacific Coast Numismatic Association. We have, all of you have just fabulous collections, an incredible amount of knowledge, and lots of stories to tell and to retell. And there's always something new. And sometimes there are new discoveries that continue the stories. And to prove that point, I have one final bit of info. A week ago today, an auction in near Haifa, Israel, had these two. This is a packet of 150 pfennig notes from Litzmannstadt Ghetto. They are wrapped. They have the stamp of the Elder of the Jews. These were meant to be destroyed. This is a packet of, I think, 98 of the 1 mark notes, and in Polish, these were also meant to be destroyed. So they gathered bundles of notes. They were to be destroyed. Somehow it got snuck out of the camp, out of Poland into Israel, ended up at an auction. Nobody else bid on that. I just put an opening bid on both pieces and won the lots. And I've been in contact with the auction house back and forth, and that's maybe more of the story to still be determined. Who brought this out of Poland? How did this come about? What's the story behind it? Don't know. Maybe we'll find out. And that's the end of my talk.
Great. Thank you, Charlie. Questions from anybody out there for Charlie? Definitely.
This is Harold. Just wanted to compliment Charlie on just an excellent presentation. Just the level of detail and also feeling the sadness of it. Now, at one point you also mentioned that maybe stamps got produced also.
Yes, they had postal stamps. I think they cost, like I said, 10 pfennig, 10 cents. So I think they're probably available. I don't collect stamps, or I don't collect the chits or various things, so I'm not sure where to get those. But I know they had a functioning post office. Of course, everything that came in was sorted through by the German authorities first, but some things did go out through the postal service, and some things came back in. And
Yeah, I was wondering if one went out actually had the Lutz stamps on them.
Only question on the. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'd imagine yes, but I would have to, look into that. I haven't actually seen any, canceled Litzmannstadt stamps, for instance. That would be really interesting to see if those are around.
Yeah.
Charlie, on the Not Guild, did you, in your research, find other Not Guild that also had these counterfeit detection marks on them?
I have not gone there. Actually, I will actually look through the book of the POW money and concentration camp money, and see. It's interesting. Camp Hay in Australia. I think I'm not sure if they're British or who's in charge, or some Germans with humor, because they would have like sheep, but they would have like hidden writing inside the sheep, and they would have hidden names in them, and there's some kind of humorous little bits and pieces that they added to the notes that in fact the name of there's a list of like 7 names of certain people that actually somehow got snuck in on the notes. So there were other kind of hidden messages or hidden meanings in those notes, for instance. So I don't know about the other anti-counterfeiting measures.
Yeah, that was a fascinating talk. Appreciated it.
Charlie, it's Herb here. On the Australian notes, it says, "We are here because we are here around the periphery of the notes, all the notes." And then the maker of the notes have hidden their names in some of the vignettes and some of the designs on the notes. So that's what that is. So if you look carefully, if you see one of the notes around the periphery, it says, "We are here because we are here. We are here because we are here," circling the note.
Yeah. Thank you. This civilian concentration camp book, the civilian camp money book, actually has really nice illustrations of that too. If you can find a copy, so it's really fun to look that up. Thank you, Herb.
Did the elderly Jewish gentleman die of natural causes? Because I sort of missed that part.
No. He was sent to Auschwitz. So he was murdered at Auschwitz along with everybody else. So even those in charge, he collaborated with the Germans, didn't save him.
Oh, well.
Yeah, indeed.
Charlie, you asked a question regarding the sizes of the token coinage.
Oh yeah.
From the camps in the British Empire, and my suspicion there is that because the entire British coinage system for much of the empire was based on base metal for the small denomination coins and more precious metals like silver for the higher denomination coins, even the 3 and 6 pence at times. The higher value coins were naturally smaller, and I think they simply continued the pattern of sizes that they were used to, with the smaller denomination coins being bigger pieces, because they were going to be handled more.
Right.
But they ended up making everything out of base metal because they didn't want precious metals in the hands of the prisoners.
Right. But that visual recognition of the size kind of, reinforced the denomination, I guess. So that
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah. So I think it was just continuing the traditional sizes of the small denominations versus the high denominations.
Okay, thank you.